Joe sat in his small apartment, surrounded by faded military photos and old medals, reminders of a life that now felt forgotten. He was older, his face lined with years, his once strong body now stooped, but his eyes still held the fire of someone who had lived fully, though the world around him seemed to have moved on. Every year his birthday passed like any other. He didn't expect much, but a small hope remained. Maybe someone would remember. A phone call, a card, a kind word. But those gestures never came. He wandered through town, stopping at his usual coffee shop. The barista said hello, but no one noticed it was his birthday. He spent the afternoon at his favorite park bench, the shade of the oak tree his only company. The silence was louder today, heavier than usual. It wasn't just his birthday that was forgotten, it was him. He walked past the diner where he once met friends, now empty and quiet. He remembered the good times, laughter, stories, camaraderie. Those were the days when he was part of something, but as time passed the letters stopped, and his comrades drifted away. Some were gone forever, others just out of reach. Joe's heart ached as he sat on the park bench, the same one he'd sat on for years. The air had grown cooler, and the sunlight was fading. He could still hear the voices of his friends, the sound of helicopters, the warmth of campfires. They had joked to keep their spirits up during long nights, but those memories were starting to blur, like old photos fading in the sun. It felt like nobody remembered the man he once was, the man who had served his country, the man who had been a friend, a brother. Now he was just Joe, the lonely veteran, forgotten by the world. Feeling the weight of the emptiness growing inside him, Joe decided to make one last attempt to feel connected, to hear a familiar voice. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number of his niece, someone he hadn't spoken to in months. She had once promised to visit, but those promises had been broken like so many others. The phone rang, and Joe waited, his heart pounding in his chest. After a few rings, the line clicked. "Hello?" Her voice was distant, distracted. "Hey, it's Uncle Joe," he said softly, trying to mask the sadness in his voice. "Just calling to see how you're doing." There was a long pause before she replied, her voice flat. "Oh hey, Uncle Joe, things are good, busy you know." "I get it," Joe said, his fingers tapping nervously on the phone. "Just wanted to wish you a good day. Thought maybe we could catch up sometime soon." "Yeah, maybe," she replied. "I've got a lot going on right now, but I'll let you know." "All right then, take care. Bye." The call ended, leaving Joe with nothing but the hum of silence in his ear. He sighed, rubbing his hand over his face. It was always the same. The conversations were brief, awkward, and filled with the unspoken truth that his family had forgotten him, or maybe they never really remembered him at all. Joe sat back in his chair and stared out the window, the weight of his isolation pressing down on him. There had been a time when he was important, when people needed him, but now, he was just a shadow, a forgotten figure in the background. He stood up slowly, his joints aching as he made his way to the bus stop. The walk was short, but it felt longer today. The streets felt emptier, the world seemed quieter, as if everyone had gone about their business without noticing him. When the bus arrived, Joe climbed aboard, taking a seat near the window. The bus was crowded, filled with people heading home after their day, lost in their own lives. He sat quietly, staring out at the passing streets, watching the world move around him. It was like this every day, people rushing by, too busy to even glance at the man who had given so much in his youth. Across the aisle, a woman sat, casually chatting with a man sitting next to her. Her voice was warm, her laughter light. But she didn't notice Joe. To her, he was just another face in the crowd, just another quiet passenger on a bus that would take him home to an empty house. He wondered if she would even remember him when she got off the bus. For a long time, Joe just watched the scene unfold, his mind drifting, the quiet ache of loneliness growing stronger. He wished he could feel connected again, feel seen, but today, like every other day, it felt like the world had forgotten about him. The bus rumbled along the streets, the hum of the tires on the pavement a steady rhythm that almost lulled Joe into a daze. The noise of the other passengers, their conversations, and the occasional laughter, all felt distant to him. He had long stopped trying to engage with them. They were just faces, fleeting figures in a busy world that had no room for the old veteran, who now sat in silence. His gaze remained fixed on the window, the view outside a blur of trees and buildings. The bus made a stop, the doors creaking open. People began shuffling out, some quickly, others more slowly, but Joe didn't move. He wasn't in a hurry, there was nowhere to go, nothing to do, just the endless waiting for time to pass. But then, as the woman who had been sitting across from him stood up to leave, something changed. She paused for a moment, her hand on the metal pole, and for the briefest second, their eyes met. There was a flicker of recognition in her gaze, as if she had noticed something about him, something she had seen before, or maybe something more than just the ordinary stranger on a bus. Then, as she turned to walk down the aisle, she stopped. She turned back towards him, and to Joe's surprise, she smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile he'd seen from strangers in passing, polite but hollow. This smile was different. It was warm, genuine. And then, without hesitation, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Happy birthday, sir." For a moment, Joe didn't know how to react. His heart skipped a beat, the words catching him completely off guard. No one had wished him a happy birthday in years, not since his wife had passed, not since his friends had all drifted away. It was as if time had frozen for a moment, the world around him blurring as he tried to process what had just happened. She hadn't asked, hadn't looked for any acknowledgement. She had simply known, and it had been enough. "Happy birthday, sir." Those three simple words were all it took. They broke through the silence that had enveloped him for so long, shattering the loneliness that had grown around him like a wall. They weren't just words, they were a lifeline, a reminder that he was seen, that he mattered. Joe blinked, and for a moment he wasn't sure if he could speak. His throat tightened, and his eyes stung, threatening to betray him. He looked down, his hand trembling slightly, as he adjusted the brim of his old worn cap. He wasn't used to feeling anything, not like this, and certainly not from a stranger. The woman was already turning to leave, but she hesitated for a moment, sensing something perhaps. In his silence, she slowly returned to her seat, and sat down next to him, giving him the space to gather himself. She didn't press him with questions or demands. She simply waited, offering him a moment of peace. Joe took a shaky breath, struggling to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. You remembered." The woman nodded, her expression soft. "I didn't forget, it's important. Everyone deserves to be remembered, especially today." For a long moment, they sat in silence. Joe could feel the weight of the years in his chest, the burden of solitude lifting just a little. The simple act of kindness, a stranger remembering his birthday, something so small, felt like a mountain being moved inside him. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Joe spoke again, his voice thicker now with emotion. "I used to have friends, good friends, back in the day. We'd share stories, talk about life. But they're all gone now. Family, they don't call anymore. It's like I've just faded into the background. People forget." The woman listened intently, her gaze steady and compassionate. "I can't imagine what that must feel like." Joe nodded slowly, his voice quiet. "I served in the military, a long time ago. It was a different time. I had brothers in arms. But now, it's just me." Her eyes softened, and she gave a small understanding smile. "You're not alone, sir. You're not invisible. You matter, you're important." The words sank deep into Joe's heart, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel like a ghost. He didn't feel like the forgotten man on the bus. He felt seen. Joe's chest tightened with emotion as the tears finally escaped, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of a lifetime of unspoken pain, finding an outlet. "I don't know what to say," Joe whispered, his voice trembling. "Thank you." The woman reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You don't need to say anything. You're not alone, you're here, and that's enough." Joe couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him like that, with such genuine care, such humanity. It was a simple moment, a brief exchange, but it felt like a door had been opened, and for the first time in a long time, Joe felt like he could walk through it. The woman's words lingered in the air, filling the space between them with an unexpected weight. Joe felt the tears welling up again, but this time, they weren't just from gratitude, they were from something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. She shifted in her seat, her eyes reflecting a quiet intensity as she continued. "I know it's hard. I've heard your story before, in a way. My father, he served too. Joe glanced at her, his brow furrowing slightly, as he tried to process her words. Your father? He asked, his voice barely audible. The woman nodded, a small smile crossing her lips. Yes, he served in Vietnam. He was a great man, brave, strong, proud, but when he came home, things were different. People didn't thank him, they didn't acknowledge what he had done. He struggled, just like so many others. Over time, he became more and more isolated. It hurt him, but he never complained. He didn't want pity. She paused, her eyes distant as she reflected on the past. Joe sat quietly, listening. He had never met anyone who understood the kind of loneliness he had felt after his time in the service. He had always assumed his experience was unique, that no one else could understand how it felt to give everything for a country that seemed to forget you as soon as you returned. The woman looked back at him, her gaze unwavering. But when my father passed away, I realized something. I realized how many others like him were out there, men and women who had served, who had sacrificed, but who were left behind, forgotten. So I decided to do something about it. Joe blinked in surprise. What do you mean? She smiled, a determined glint in her eyes. I started traveling, going from town to town, meeting veterans, talking to them, thanking them for their service. I've made it my mission to find those who feel invisible, who feel forgotten, and remind them that they matter, that they are not alone, that there are still people who care. Joe's heart skipped a beat, as the full weight of her words sank in. The stranger sitting next to him wasn't just some random woman on a bus. She was on a mission to restore dignity, to remind veterans like him that they were seen, that their sacrifices were valued. It wasn't just an accident that she had wished him a happy birthday. It wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was part of a larger purpose, a cause she had dedicated herself to. He looked at her, his voice thick with emotion. You do this for all of us. The woman nodded, her expression filled with quiet pride. I do. I know it's not much, but I believe that every veteran deserves to be thanked, to be remembered. My father may have never gotten the recognition he deserved, but I can make sure others do. I can make sure you do. Joe sat back, his mind spinning. He had spent so many years feeling like he was fading into nothingness, as if his life and his service had been forgotten. But now, as the woman spoke, he realized that he wasn't alone in that feeling. There were still people out there, people who cared, who remembered. For the first time in a long time, Joe felt the weight of his own sacrifices lift. The world may have moved on, but there were still those who remembered. And in that moment, he understood that his life, his service, his story, it mattered. Not just to him, but to others. The world had forgotten him, but this woman had reminded him that he was never truly invisible. The bus came to a stop, and Joe slowly stood, his legs stiff from the long ride. As he stepped off the bus, a strange lightness filled him, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the weight of the world pressing down on him anymore. He felt seen. He felt alive again, as if that small moment with the stranger had reignited something deep within him, something he thought had long burned out. The woman's words echoed in his mind, as he walked away from the bus stop. Happy birthday, sir. It wasn't much, just 3 simple words, but to Joe, those words had pierced through years of loneliness, reminding him that he wasn't invisible, that he still had a place in this world. It had been so long since someone had acknowledged him, and the effect of it rippled through him in ways he couldn't quite explain. The world may have forgotten him, but in that moment, someone had remembered, and for the first time in a long while, Joe felt like his story wasn't finished. As he walked back to his quiet house, the weight of his past seemed a little lighter. His mind wandered, no longer bogged down by the ache of isolation. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to his life than the quiet days he had grown used to. Maybe he could reconnect with the world, find meaning again. Maybe he could even start talking to people, share his stories, find new ways to be part of the world around him. After all, the world hadn't completely moved on from him, not yet, and that thought filled him with something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The bus ride had been a small moment, but the power of that simple act of kindness, the recognition of his birthday, the warmth of a stranger's smile, had opened his eyes to the possibility of connection once again. The woman's gesture hadn't just made his day, It had made him see that the world still had room for him. Sometimes it only took one person to make you feel like you mattered again. It only took one person to remind you that you weren't alone. The story serves as a reminder that kindness has the power to change lives. Sometimes the simplest gestures, saying happy birthday, or offering a kind smile, can make all the difference. It's easy to forget how much of an impact we can have on others, how our words and actions can transform someone's day, or even their outlook on life. For Joe, those 3 words were the turning point, the reminder that he was still part of something bigger than himself. As the sun began to set, Joe stood on his porch, looking out over the quiet street. He didn't feel entirely alone anymore. It wasn't just the kindness of the stranger, it was the understanding that sometimes people need to be reminded that they matter. Joe's journey had been a lonely one, but he was ready for the next step, knowing that kindness still existed in the world, even when it felt like nobody was watching. And so, Joe's quiet journey was forever changed by the simple, kind words of a stranger. It's a reminder that even in a world that often seems too busy to notice, small acts of kindness can make all the difference. We all need to be reminded that we matter, that we're seen, and that we're not forgotten. If this story touched you, remember to share it with someone who might need a little reminder today. And don't forget, sometimes the smallest gestures can change someone's entire world. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more heartfelt moments like these.